right, well, welcome to our second round of Groves here in our new series as we talk about how to church. And hopefully over this past week, you've been thinking about how to church, what it means to be the church, how do we do that? And this week we're going to kind of continue. We're going to be looking at Ephesians, and actually the same passage we talked about this past Sunday morning. We're going to look at 3 verses that I think will really relate to this idea of how to church and how do we. It's kind of this idea if we've gotten off course, as you just talked about in your Grove, if we've gotten off course in the last 50 years, or if church is starting to become something it wasn't intended to be, then how do we get back on track and how do we get back to what it's supposed to be? Because maybe what we're experiencing right now in a lot of churches is not what God intended when he created the church in the first place. And so I want to give you a little mathematical equation that I think is what church is supposed to be that we're going to read in these 3 verses. So I want to go ahead and read them. We kind of read them on Sunday morning, but we didn't talk in depth about these 3 verses. And so we're kind of going back and looking at them again. And so the first one is Ephesians 3, 1 and 2, these 2 verses. And it says this: "For this reason I, Paul, the prisoner of Christ Jesus, for the sake of you Gentiles. Surely you have heard about the administration of God's grace that was given to me for you." And then in the last verse, verse 13, he says this: "I ask you therefore not to be discouraged because of my sufferings for you, which are for your glory," or which are your glory. And so it's kind of this idea, if you've been tracking on Sunday mornings, where Paul, the reason he's writing this letter to the Ephesians is because he's in prison. He's about to go into trial. He's in Rome under house arrest. You've heard me say this multiple times. And the reason he's under arrest is because he's been preaching the gospel, the good news, to the Gentiles. And as a Jew, it was kind of like, no, you don't really associate with Gentiles. And so he's got himself in a heap of trouble. He went to Jerusalem, if you remember the story, and he brought this guy Trophimus. He was traveling with him, who was a Gentile. He was from Ephesus. And people saw Paul with this guy so much that they just thought he brought him with him into the temple, which was a big no-no, if you remember this whole story. And so the reason that Paul is a prisoner of Christ Jesus, in verse 1 there, "For this reason I, Paul, the prisoner of Christ Jesus." He's not actually a prisoner of Christ Jesus. He's actually a prisoner of Caesar, of Rome. But he's saying, I'm really a prisoner of Christ Jesus because I'm called to do these things because of my relationship with Jesus and what he's called me to do. And I love what he says. He says, "For the sake of you Gentiles." He's all, for your sake. And literally the translation, the word here is for you. And the word for is kind of the Greek word, which we kind of get a lot of different things from. It means on behalf of. So he's saying, for this reason, I, Paul, the prisoner of Christ Jesus, on behalf of you Gentiles. It means for the betterment of. So he's saying, I'm a prisoner of Christ Jesus for the benefit, the betterment of you Gentiles. It means for the advantage of. So he's saying, hey, I'm a prisoner of Christ Jesus for the advantage of you Gentiles. And then it says this: "Surely you have heard about the administration of God's grace." It's like, sure, you've heard the story of how I came to know Jesus, how, the whole light that came upon me on the road to Damascus, and how he told me that I was going to be a light to the Gentiles. He's like, surely you guys have heard the story, right? And he says this: "It's been made, this mystery," verse 2, "Surely you have heard about the administration of God's grace that was given to me for you." And that's kind of the mathematical equation I want you to think of when you think of church. He's saying, the reason I'm undergoing these sufferings and the reason I'm a prisoner for Christ Jesus is because of you. It's for the sake of you. It's for the benefit, the betterment and benefit of you. It's for the advantage of you Gentiles. He's all, that's why I've been going through all this. He says, God gave me this grace. He gave it to me for you. He's like, God has given me all these things to me, but really it's not for me. It's for you. And so that's kind of the equation I want you to think of. Here's a little help you out here. If you can read this, that's what church is supposed to be. It's supposed to be the same attitude as Paul when it came to the Gentiles, where he's saying, hey, this is to me. God's grace has been administered to me, but it's for you. It's for your betterment. It's for your benefit. It's for your advantage. It's for your sake. It's on your behalf. And so when you have church and it's God has given these things to me, but it's for you, it's for your benefit, then that's a healthy church. And I have a feeling that a lot of us haven't experienced this, or maybe we have in the past, or maybe we haven't, I don't know. Because I think a lot of churches, this is the equation. Church is to me, for me. So the administration of God's grace has been given to me, and it's for me. This whole thing is for me. It's very individualistic. It's all about what I can get out of it. It's what we talked about earlier in your Grove, where it's a consumer culture, where what's in it for me? What do I get out of this thing? What does this church have to offer me? And so church becomes, it's to me and it's for me. And that's kind of, not a healthy place. And this may be even worse. Church is to you for me, where God has a given grace to you so that it can benefit me. Really, it's all about me. It's to you for me, or it's to me for me. Either way, it's really all about me. And then it gets a little bit scary because then you get to something like this. Church is to me, for me, minus you. Because the honest truth is sometimes we believe that church would be a whole lot better if there weren't for the people. Because I want it to be to me, I want it to be for me. And if I could just get rid of all you, then things would be much better. And that's where church starts to get really messy. But none of these equations are what God had in store or in mind. It wasn't supposed to be to you for me, or to me for me, or to me for me minus you. It was meant to always be to me for you. That's what church is supposed to be. And what he says here at the very end in verse 13, he says, I ask you therefore not to be discouraged because of my sufferings, again, for you, for your benefit, for your betterment, for your advantage, for your sake, for your behalf. He's like, I'm suffering right now for you, on your behalf. And that's why he's in prison in the first place. I'm doing this all for your sake, for your benefit. This word that we translated as suffering, it's the Greek word thlipsis, and it really just means pressure. It's to be put under pressure. It means tribulation. It means affliction. It means distress. It means being kind of hemmed in where you don't really have very many options. It's being compressed. But the idea is you're putting on extra load, extra pressure on yourself. And he's saying the reason I'm willing to put extra pressure on myself is because my whole mathematical equation when it comes to church is it's to me, but it's for you. I'm doing these things for you. And so I think if we were to get back to this equation, to me, for you, that would help us immensely in our church culture, which today is very consumeristic. It's very much a spectator thing in your average church, and that's not what it was meant to be. It was meant to be, God has given me grace. He's given me gifts. He's given me talents. He's given me resources, and it's not to me, for me. It's to me, for you. And so that's where I feel like if we can get back to that, if we can discuss that in our small groups this week, like what would that look like? What does it look like for Rising Church to be a church where we are to me, for you, for the sake of others, for the benefit of others, for the betterment of others, for the advantage of others? How would that be a revolutionary thing in today's American church culture? How would that make us stand out differently? What would that look like on a weekly basis? What would that look like for us to be willing to put pressure on ourselves, to be willing to take on tribulation and trial and distress and compression for the sake of others, for the benefit of others, and not just whatever's gonna be best for me, but instead what's gonna be best for others. And that's why I think it's gonna be interesting, hopefully in our discussion today, as we're gonna talk about one of the primary illustrations that Paul uses, that the Bible uses for what it means to be a disciple and disciple people in the New Testament, is the idea of a parent, a spiritual parent and spiritual children, because parenthood is really one of the ideal, probably most realistic examples that we have in our everyday life of a place where it is pretty much always to me, for you. And he's saying that's what your attitude needs to be like in this new family that I'm creating, the church. It needs to be the attitude of to me, for you. And so I hope this will kind of spark some conversation in your small groups, that you guys will be able to discuss what this looks like, what this means. How do we get back? Maybe it was like that, 50 years ago, but maybe not so much now. But how do we get back to where it's like that again? Where we come to church and we're a part of church, where we see the church as being a place where, man, it's not just me, for me, it's to me, for you. So thanks. Hopefully that gives you some food for thought, and we'll see you next week.